Just so everybody knows, the format of this is we'll go through this. There's the ability to chat. There's the ability for you guys to ask questions as well. Evelyn's going to be monitoring a lot of the questions. If you can, Evelyn, it's on the left-hand side under Q&A. Everybody can ask questions over in the Q&A, and we're not going to take any of the questions verbally until the last 15 minutes. And then if anybody has questions that pop up, Evelyn will either text back or I'll get to those questions at the end of the half an hour. We're going to go through 3 topics. I'm going to cover one, Barry's going to cover one, and then me and Barry are going to kind of tag team the last topic. So we're just going to hold all questions till the end, and then if people want to type in anything, they're very welcome to. Okay. So right now we got about 15 attendees. It's 7:01 p.m. So we're going to get rolling because I need to respect the time of the people that showed up on time, and the people that are late, they get to miss out a little bit. But the good thing about this is we are recording the webinar, and it will be reposted on our YouTube channel, and it will be also reposted on our blog. And we'll send out an email for everybody with the links to those afterwards, so that if you do want to rewatch or you came in late or anything like that, that's a possibility. So today, to get rolling here, as everybody kind of starts or continues to pop in, the themes for today were put out in email and whatnot, but I'd like to review the themes that we're going to go over so everybody kind of knows what's on the agenda today. So I'm just going to do a quick screen share in order to do that. So if everybody can see my my screen over here, basically in the webinar, we're going to try and keep it to around 45 minutes. That doesn't always happen, but we're going to try our best. And did we lose Barry? Well, looked like we lost Barry there. Okay. We're going to try and keep the 45 minutes. We're going to go over 3 topics. And topic number 1 is the buying process, A to Z. How does the process work in buying in Panama? Is it a little bit different than a lot of people's home countries? Then we're going to go over insurance, utilities, maintenance costs, and when owning a home in Panama, kind of what are some of those costs? They're very common questions that we get. How much my electricity bill, things like that. And then finally, we're going to go over vacation rental and investment income, some of the ins and outs about those things. That's a really big topic, so I don't know if we'll get everything covered here, but it's something that comes up more and more often in everyday life in the real estate business, where we get a lot of people coming. Sometimes they're pure investors, sometimes they're retiring early, things like that. So we'll talk a little bit about that going forward. Okay, so moving forward on this whole thing, the first thing that we're going to talk about here is the buying process in Panama. So obviously, one of the things, if anybody's ever talked to me before, we've had meetings. Sometimes I know some of you, I recognize a lot of you sitting here in the webinar. I've talked to some of you before one-on-one. The biggest thing that I always push when buying in Panama, and you're going to hear me talk about it, Evelyn talk about it, Barry talk about it, Kadeen talk about it, we're all going to talk about a lot, is finding the area that you want to live in first, okay? We all agree on this. We always think the biggest mistake that anybody can make is buying a house in an area that you don't know. Okay, so you might see the world's most beautiful house. It might be beachfront. It might have amazing ocean views, but you really need to figure out if that area of Panama is where you want to live before you even start looking for homes. Okay, so that's step number 1 in the buying process in Panama. And we take this very seriously because we think that it is very important for your long-term happiness. And the majority of people that I find that end up in Panama that are not happy are the people that buy a home but don't do the research into the area that they want to live in. Okay, I'm not going to beat that one with I'm not going to beat the dead horse on that one. We've talked about it quite often. Okay, so let's say you discover your area, you know where you want to be in Panama. You come to us and you say, Ken, you come to say, Evelyn, whatever, you say, okay, listen, find me a house. I decided I want to be, for example, in Pedisi. Find me a house in Pedisi. Find the house that you want. The price is more or less where it is. So step number one is just like in any of our countries, you're going to put either an offer in or you're going to pay full price. Okay. If the price is great, full price. If you think the price is too high, you're going to make an offer. Okay. I always tell all my sellers that our job is to bring every offer to them. Okay. It's not my money. It's the seller's money when it comes down to it. It's the buyer's money putting the money forward. So if you want to put an offer forward, our job's going to be to put that offer forward, and then the seller has the right to say no. The seller has the right to come back with a counter offer, or we start. I always say dancing the tango and seeing if we can come to an agreement that works everybody. So once we get past that part, typically we do the offer process verbally, okay? And then most of our buyers that are coming in are coming in from other country, and they need us to kind of hold their hand, walk them through the process, and guide them into what needs to be done for the rest of the parts of it. And that's where, for those of that you can see here, I'm going to bring up my screen here. I think it stopped sharing. I'm going to bring up my screen here. And the next part of this process is we do what's called an offer letter. Okay. And the offer letter, oops, just a second here. This is a new screen share process. Bear with me here, please. Not let me do that. Okay. Anyways, hopefully you guys can see my screen. Can everybody see my screen okay with the offer letter part? Evelyn, are you seeing it?
Yes, and I
Okay.
zoom in, but I don't know if that showed to the rest.
No, it's not. It's not showing to the rest. So I have it fairly large zoom. So the offer letter in a lot of the countries where we come in is a big part of the standard process, okay? But in Panama, when I bought my house, when I know a lot of other transactions that have been, there's no offer. And a big part of the offer letter is that it puts the offer forward officially between both parties, and it lays everything out that those things are agreed upon. Okay. And then what I've always found, especially when there's a couple lawyers that are involved, is it gives the lawyers a roadmap to go to the next part of the process, which we'll talk about in a minute, which is the promissory contract. Okay. So when I first got in this, everybody was just kind of, they throw it out there. They go, I got a buyer, I got a seller, they've agreed on stuff, let's get stuff going. And then the lawyer's going into it blind, and they're coming in with 20 emails. Oh, I need the buyer's email. I need the seller's phone number. What was the FINCA number? FINCA number is a title number. What are all these different types of things? So we came up with a very basic and simple idea in real estate, which is we're going to put an offer letter together. We put the offer letter together, and I'm going to go over the offer letter with you in a minute. And then both parties sign that they agree that these are the terms that they're willing to accept. And then we hand that over to the lawyer to do the next part. So an offer letter is pretty simple. And this is one that I've redacted some details and changed some things and stuff like that. But this is a deal I did very, very recently. I changed the math. It was not $1 million deal, don't worry. But I changed the math on it, but it was easy math doing that. So basically, this letter is to indicate official offer by the citizen, by the buyer. And then the buyer quite often is coming from somewhere else. They're not usually citizens of Panama in our particular brokerage. They're coming in, but in this one, the buyer is a citizen of Panama and they have a cedula. So in Panama, your official ID for doing everything is a cedula. If you don't have a cedula, then you default back to your passport, okay, if you're coming from another country. To buy the following property from the seller, okay? And the seller is the person is a company in this case, okay? So the property is being held in a corporation. And then that corporation, we need to know who represents that corporation as the signee of the corporation, represented by the person's name, a citizen. And in this case, they're from South Africa with passport number because they didn't have cedulas. They did everything under their passports. And the second person, in this case, it was a husband and a wife, a citizen also of South Africa with this passport. So in this case, it's just then we're going to identify for the lawyer. Okay. We're going to identify with the lawyer and everything like that, the FINCA number, the title number. So the lawyer can go ahead and start doing the title searches and seeing if there's any problems with the property and all that type of stuff. So FINCA number, in this case, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. with location code. And a location code here serves as your postal code, even though we don't have a postal system. And it also, for example, there's a VINCA number, and then every area of Panama has a location code. Okay, and Petitie's location code is 7401. The more or less the address. I don't put the full address in here because the address is more of like a topographical location, and so I don't put that in there. But the lawyer is going to pull it off of the public registry. Okay, and then in this case, this property actually had two titles. Okay, it had two separate pieces of property that were being sold together, and so in this case, I had to put two different thinking numbers that were in here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, no, it's not the real numbers, obviously. And then we're going to put in the details so the lawyer knows this stuff. It consists of a lot of 889 square meters. Everything in Panama is done in meters. It's a metric country. And then both fincas have a house, 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and all these details go over and of what's being included in the sale. This helps the lawyers to write up the contract with the details that are there without 1,000 emails going back and forth, which theoretically expedites the process. Okay. The buyer reserves the right. This is a very important point that we have here. The buyer reserves the right to buy the property, a third-party name, corporation, or foundation. So lots of times if people are coming in and they're forming a foundation or they're forming a corporation to hold the property in, we're not going to talk about that today. We talked about that in the last webinar. They don't have that foundation yet. And don't worry, you don't need to have the foundation of the corporation. You can start this process in your personal name and you can finish the process in the foundation, the corporation name, okay? Because the foundation of the corporation only takes about 2 weeks to create. And a real estate transactions, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, depending on what's going on. So typically these things are done parallel and they're finished in the foundation of the corporation's name. Okay, and that's why we put that in here. In this case, I made up a number. The buyer wishes to pay the price of $1 million. Upon signing of the promissory sales contract, and this is important, you don't put any money forward unless it's a reservation. And we'll talk about that in another webinar. And that's usually like $1,000, $2,000, $500. A 10% deposit does go forward at the signing of the promissory contract. In this case, it would be $100,000 on $1 million. And that will be sent directly. And we have a system where we get the lawyers to handle the money on the deposits that come in. That way, the buyer's lawyer is receiving the money and they distribute what needs to be distributed for paying utility bills up to date, zeroing out everything so that when the buyer gets the property, it's zero sum. There's nothing hanging on. There's nothing hanging on to outstanding property taxes. There's none of that type of stuff. Okay. So it's zero summed, and quite often that is all zero summed out from that 10% that comes in. We as an agency retain part of our commission out of that. It gets held by the lawyer in trust, and it goes from there. Now, lots of times, once that deposit goes forward, that's a non-refundable deposit. So you need to make sure that your lawyer has all the due diligence done before the signing of the promissory contract. Your lawyer needs to check property titles. You need to have inspections done if you're doing inspections. All that type of stuff needs to be done. Okay. Now, the remaining balance of $900,000, in this case, the remaining 90%, would be paid directly to the seller's bank account in Panama. But that doesn't get paid to the seller's bank account in Panama until the signing of the final contract. The title transfer contract takes place at the Notary Public, and quite often until that title transfer is done and registered in the buyer's name, and then the money's put forward. So typically, the money's not transferred directly towards. Now, there's other ways of doing this. Sometimes the money goes to a cashier's check, and the Notary Public holds that cashier's check. Sometimes we've used escrow agencies, but escrow agencies are not very common in Panama, and they're expensive. I just had a deal. It was like a $250,000 deal that was being proposed, and the escrow agency wanted $3,500 in order to hold that money. So quite often, a cashier's check's issued for $11. And then the Notary Public holds that cashier's check if the payment's an issue. Okay. And then we put closing dates. When's the closing date going to happen? And then conditions. Okay. And Panama, the big thing about Panama is that Panama's contract law. So we're going to put in the conditions that we want to put in. And if the buyer and the seller agree to those conditions, then that's what gets put in the contract. Okay. In this case, this is a standard clause of all the taxes need to be paid up before the buyer takes possession. A list of included furniture and appliances is to be provided by the seller, so the buyer knows what they're getting with the deal of appliances and furniture. In this case, there was an easement on the property. So the easement issue needed to be put forward and satisfied to the buyer's desire that the easement was something that was an easement and it wasn't going to be like where they couldn't access their property because the neighbor controlled the driveway. And that's what they wanted to know. And then the buyer, in this case, does not wish to purchase the property with the corporation. An SA in Panama is a corporation. So the buyer wanted to separate the property from the seller's corporation. It's called separation of shares, and then put it into their own foundation. So a seller cannot obligate you to take their corporation because the corporation could have historical problems, tax issues, stuff like that. Some people like to take the corporations if the lawyers do the due diligence and then go from there. Okay, because sometimes they get a free corporation that way instead of forming one for $1,500. We always put our commissions, okay, in this because our commissions go into the promissory contract to make sure that we get paid. That's important, obviously, as a brokerage. And then this year, I've had a lot of problems when we started doing these letters where the attorneys took these letters and then started trying to renegotiate it. So we put a clause in these letters now where we're basically saying, listen, these are the terms. The buyer and the seller agreed to these terms. Please put these terms into the contract and make it into all the legal mumbo jumbo that needs to go in the contract rather than starting to renegotiate at that point, because unfortunately that makes everybody a little bit nervous and can kill a deal. Okay. So if anybody has any questions on this, go ahead and put that forward. Okay. Sorry, I was just reading some of the questions that were going there. Evelyn, you can hear me okay? There seem to have been some audio problems, but you can hear me okay, Evelyn?
Yes, I can hear you well.
Okay, no problem. Just making sure. Okay, so after this letter takes place, I'm going to stop my screen share now. After this letter takes place, then what happens is then like I said, the lawyers both create the promissory contract. It gets reviewed by the buyer and the seller. Any language that needs to be termed. Sometimes there's one draft of language changes. It gets signed by both parties. Okay, lots of times we do this by DocuSign if people are not in the country. And then we go forward from that, and then the 10% goes forward. And then from there, you know, the agreed upon closing date creates the title transfer contract after that. Okay, so the real meat and potatoes is the promissory contract. The title transfer contract's kind of a formality, and that gets signed at the notary public, either by both parties being at the notary at the same time or giving your lawyers a power of attorney, or in the case of a corporation or foundation, you can give them signing authority on behalf of the corporation or foundation. Okay, so that's kind of how the buying process works here. Okay, it's a little bit different than your own home countries, but we've tried to make it as safe and secure for the buyers and for the sellers in doing it kind of within our way. We've had some pushback from lawyers on not wanting to handle money or not wanting to do this. Or for example, we just had a case not long ago where lawyers didn't want to touch the money, but both parties were outside of the country. There's no way to get a cashier's check issued on that. So we actually had to change lawyers in that case because we couldn't secure the money from the buyer and the seller on anything. So it was a little bit of a mess and we had to go that way. Okay. I'm going to stop talking about the buying process. I'm going to bring Barry back into this as a presenter, and then Barry's going to talk a little bit about fees and stuff in Panama, on what his expenses are, what he knows about expenses, things like that. So Barry, you're up, buddy.
Hear me now? All right. So when we're talking about expenses, let's start with a few things here. Let's say you purchased a home and you want to buy insurance for the home. Our recommendation for that is, yeah, buy the insurance, but we're familiar with homes that are built, constructed with wood and all kinds of flammable products. And the type of insurance that we recommend here as an individual doesn't mean that you're going to do this, but is basically contents insurance. Now, yes, that's going to burn on you too, but the chance of a fire here is pretty remote. So you consider the fact that you're buying insurance is going to run you about $600. That's per year. That's not per month, which is more or less what we're accustomed to in North America. there's also other options you can utilize within the insurance program. Again, there's earthquakes that happen on a regular basis, but we've been here for 4 years and we haven't really felt more than about 2 or 3 of them. So it's not very common. Vehicle insurance, you're looking at, let's say we've got a 2016 and 2008. It's running around $400 to $500, $600 a year, and that's not per month. Of course, the more expensive the actual vehicle is, of course, it's going to be a little bit more money, but not a lot. Health insurance is another thing that we looked at. Health insurance is not something that I think is a primary concern unless you've got other ailments, but you can buy health insurance for anywhere from $200 per month and more. And the deductibles are going to really determine that, as well as your age and previous illnesses. But the hospitals here are very inexpensive. So that's something that you can consider. You've got private hospitals as well as public hospitals, and the public hospitals are very inexpensive. And it's the same surgeons and same specialists that have to spend their time in the public hospital. So you're getting the same service and the top of the line medical service here. Utilities, primary costs are power. That's where your biggest dollars are going to be spent. There is a state organization that called Naturgy that actually runs the power systems here in Panama. Costs range anywhere from $7 and $25 I've heard, which we've never seen, but they can range up to $400. And this is what we've experienced here, but we've got a couple of duplexes that we have here that's why we're spending that kind of money. Plus, you look at AC and you look at pump operation on the pool, all these things add up. LPG, which is your propane, that's your gas for your stoves, your hot water tanks, basic usage, very inexpensive. It's being subsidized by the government as well. You can buy a 25-pound tank for about $5.54. Not buy it, but refill it for that price. Your initial purchase is going to run you about $60, $70, depending upon where you go. Now, you can have the larger tanks for about 100-pound tanks, and those are at $85, $72 to $85 per refill, and they usually last 60 to 70 days, depending again on the usage. Water and garbage, you're running at approximately $225 per year. That's pick up garbage here twice a week, and your water is coming right from the town itself. Property tax, a whole $82 a year. Whoopie-doo. Not a lot of money there. The only thing is that you look at a foundation or corporation, which is recommended that you do use for purchase of your property. The renewal for that on taxes is about $600 to $700 per year. So there's the quick rundown on some of the costs. And if you anything more you want to add to it as far as questions go, I'd be more than happy to answer them for you.
Sorry, I have my microphone muted. The one thing I'll add to what Barry had to say about costs is it depends on where you are. Okay, so for example, in Petitcie, we're about $8.50 a month for water. It's a flat rate no matter how much you use. You have to have a meter, but they don't care what the meter says. And for example, garbage, it just went up to $18 for the whole year. So every different district and municipality has a little bit of different costs, but in general, the costs are incredibly less than what they are in Europe, Canada, America, places like that. Okay, so costs are very, very reasonable. Okay, moving on. We're into 7:24, and I don't want to keep everybody, and I do want to leave some time for some Q&A at the end. Moving on to the next theme, which is investment properties, rental income, things like that. I'm going to talk a little bit about Airbnb and stuff like that later on. Barry, if you're done sneezing in a minute.
Sorry about that.
You're actually a landlord. So I'd like you to talk a little bit about your personal experience as a landlord and renting out. Barry owns a duplex, and he rents out half of the other side of his house, which is a very lovely house, by the way. And Barry, if you don't mind talking a little bit about your personal experience about long-term rentals, and then I'll get a little bit more into the investor short-term rental side.
Certainly. Long-term rentals, typically, if you're in a gated community, which we are in right now, and it's also suggested and recommended that you do this if you've got rental properties elsewhere other than the gated community, is minimum 6 months. and you can go as many years as you want. But on average, we run about a 12-month cycle. So they can renew at any point in given time for the next year if they want. As far as income increases or revenue increases, we put into our contract maximum of 5% increase per year. So it's a controlled mechanism, and it gives a sense of confidence for the renters coming in. Most rentals are all furnished, just like home sales. They're mostly all furnished, and we furnish this one completely. As far as a casita, we have also a casita here, and we rent that out sort of
Mainly to me when I come and stay in Boquete.
pretty much. Yeah. And family and friends, of course. If we don't like the family very much, we charge them too.
One thing I'll say, Barry touched on there is he has a rental contract. Okay, we don't necessarily call him a lease here. Okay, Panama is a country of contract law. All right, and what that means is the devil is in the details. Okay, so I sold a house 2-3 years ago, and they had a renter in it, and the buyers decided to take over the renter and let her stay. And it was a big mistake, to be completely honest, because the renter had a very, very loose contract. And when the buyers decided that they needed to get her out, they actually had to pay a lot of money to get her out because the contract was open-ended. There was no termination period. Okay. So the good thing about Panama is that there's no like landlord tenant tribunals or this type of stuff like where I'm from in Canada. The bad part though is that if the contract is too loose, the renter has a lot of rights based on the loose contract. So, you know, I always say, and it's a little bit of an exaggeration, but if the contract says they have 24 hours to vacate, and that's what the contract says, that's what the contract says. If the contract says they have 60 days to vacate, then that's what the contract says. If the contract says it's a 1-year lease and there is no termination notice period, and let's say you want them out after 6 months, but they have a 1-year lease, technically you have to pay them out the remainder of those 6 months to get them to leave. So that's an example of what can be bad if the contract is not formed properly. Okay, or like Barry said, rental increases, things like that. Those need to be put into the contracts. Or if it's a 1-year contract, then you renew the contract, then you got to renew the contract with an agreed upon rental increase. So Panama's a little bit different. It doesn't have all the renters. There's rights here. Don't get me wrong. Renters do have rights, but the devil's in the details of the contract. So that's really, really important when we get into that type of stuff. Okay, especially on long-term rentals. Go ahead, Ben.
In furtherance to that, all contracts that are written up should be in Spanish, and you can have the English equivalent, but what holds up in court is the Spanish version of it. So that's something that everybody should be aware of. And again, if you're looking at any contract here, if it's not signed by a notary or by the attorney, it's really doesn't hold a lot of water.
Really, the notary, really. And technically, especially when you get into like promissory contracts or title transfer, or the title transfer contracts anyways, for buying properties, that's the main thing I'm concerned about more than rentals, is that they're always worded that the English is provided for consideration, and you're signing the contract based on the fact that you understand the Spanish. If you don't understand the Spanish legally, you have to hire a translator to come in and verbally read you the contract and then sign that you understood that. Okay. So yeah, legal contracts here are basically only in Spanish. Okay. So that's a very, very valid point. Okay. Moving on to the theme of investment properties, rental income, stuff like that. When you get into buying a property for a rental income, it really depends on where you're buying, what's the tourism like, what's the market like there, and everywhere is very, very different. I mean, primarily we're dealing with Pedasí, Boquete, Bocas del Toro, Panama City, and kind of the Coronado corridor, okay? Each one of those markets has its own unique niches, and then even sub-markets within those niches of what works and what doesn't work on short and long-term rentals. Okay. One thing I tell a lot of people that are coming in looking for properties is on long-term rental investments. I push them a lot over to Bocas del Toro because we represent a lot of really good properties out there. And the long-term rentals in Bocas del Toro are very, very high because they don't have any inventory for it. Okay. Short-term rentals, for example, do really well in Tennessee and Playa Banal because there's not a lot of good quality short-term rentals when the demand is high during the high seasons. So, Banal has a lot of short-term rentals, but they're always being used and they're expensive. And Tennessee doesn't have very many. So I encourage a lot of people to come in on the short-term rental side, whether it's houses or casitas or different types of products, because they can build cheaper, buy the land cheaper. People stay here and then they go to Banal over there. So they can stay here cheaper. And then the return on those investments can be quite good. Story I always tell is that I had a client last year. He had a 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom condo. It was 70 square meters. So roughly, 800 square feet, just under 800 square feet with a small swimming pool. And, he did $47,000 gross on his Airbnb rental last year. He netted around $35,000 after he paid management fees, cleaning, stuff like that. So that's, he paid out of his pocket. He had about $125,000 into that property. He had maybe another $10,000 in furniture. So that's pretty good money if he's pulling $35,000 a year in short-term rentals. Okay. Now, on the subject of the short-term rentals, you got to be careful on what the regulations are in Panama as far as licensings go. For example, I got a lot of clients that come in and they want to buy properties in Panama City for short-term rentals. Panama City has harsh regulations when it comes to short-term rentals. So if we're advertising or selling a property in Panama City that's a short-term rental Airbnb type of a thing, what we're looking at is, does that building have a hotel license? Because legally in Panama City, a short-term rental, which is under 45 days, needs to actually be licensed. Outside of Panama City, sometimes that's different. So a lot of the regions outside of Panama City technically don't need licensing, but that's a little bit of a gray area. So you really got to look into that. Okay. And there's also different types of licensing in Panama. There's hostel licensing, which is up to 5 rooms. And then over 5 rooms, you get into hotel licensing, which is a whole different creature. So the regulations, when you get into this type of stuff, I'm just going to touch on them, and I'm happy, and the rest of us are all happy to talk to you in more details if this is something that you're looking at about these types of details. But I just want to touch on it because I want to plant these bugs into your ears if you're looking into the investment side of things on buying rental properties, on possibly some of the pitfalls that you need to. There's always a solution, Panama, but sometimes there's a lot of paperwork to get to that solution. So that's important to go into. So it really depends on the market, on how much you can earn. It depends on the cost, on the ROI, obviously. And there's beach communities where Barrie is in Boquete. What would you say, Barrie? Probably the long-term rental out in Boquete is a little bit more robust than the short-term rental, or what's your take on it?
As far as robust goes, as far as what's available or what's not available, or are you talking about cost?
The prices that people can catch if they have rentals. If you had a client in Boquete, would you push them towards a short-term rental or a long-term rental? What do you think is better out in the Boquete area for the type of people that are looking for rentals?
I'd push them to as a long-term rental, minimum 12 months. And the reason I say that is because we've been here for 4 years, like I said, but we're finding each season is a little bit different than the last one. And with those changes in the seasons, you have to experience it at least a whole year to know whether or not that's the temperature that you want to live in. And that's the key. Is people think, well, it's too hot where we live right now, Boquete Canyon Village. It's the rainy season right now, and it's not as rainy as it was last year, and it's a lot cooler this year. So you have to spend some time in a specific location. There's over 100 different microclimates from Boquete to David. So you have to pick that right spot, that sweet spot, and understand that you got to experience at least 12 months of it before you make a decision saying that's where you want to live.
Yeah, and I tell a lot of people that are coming into the Tennessee market that short-term rentals, I think, are the better, but it depends on what they're buying. I think if they're buying a house, long-term is a better way to go. Right. I think if they're looking at wanting to do short terms, casitas are the better way. So we've had some projects come up recently that people are interested in. I'm like, hey, why don't you build 4 casitas and a pool, and then rent those out as a rental business on short term. And you get a good cleaning lady in, you train her on what you want to do, you give cleaning ladies checklists, you verify and get people trained up, and there's really good money in that type of a business model. And then you have 4 rental units on one property opposed to having one house. So that's an example, but that doesn't work in every single area or every single market of Panama. But in Tennessee, I think that's a really, really solid type of thing. Now, I have friends that are in Tennessee and they own 4 or 5 rental homes, and they Airbnb the rental homes. And I pick up a lot of clients that are staying there. I go pick them up. Maybe they don't have a rental car, so I'll go pick them up to do viewings. And I asked my friends, I said, why are your places always full? And what he said is they price adjust. Okay. So, if the market is busy, they'll jack their prices up. If the market's slow, they'll bring their prices down. And he said to me, the one day, he goes, listen, he goes, if it's really slow, I'll charge $80 on this small house that I have for a night. And I said, are you making money on that still? He goes, yeah, I'm still making $20 or $30 a night after all the expenses. He goes, and the place is generating money. It's flowing. It's going through. So I tell a lot of people that want to go in the short-term rental business, I said, it's better if you manage the bookings and you price adjust based on what's going on with the season. And then you let the other people, the maintenance people, the garden people, the cleaning people, let them do that type of stuff if you don't want to do that, and hire the people in to do that. Or even a property manager that can manage all those people for making sure the flip overs are done or whatever. But I think it's really important, in my opinion, on the short-term rentals that you manage your bookings, you manage your reviews, you manage your price adjusting. And price adjusting on the short-term thing is really the key secret in this market to making money on the short terms. Okay? So, but I got a lot of people here that do long terms, but it's seasonality. Sometimes you get people that come in December, January, February, and they book for the whole year. And then, this time of year, for example, in Tennessee, June, July, I mean, you can rent a house a lot cheaper because there's a lot of houses that are sitting empty on long terms because maybe somebody moved out in March or April and the houses are still sitting empty. So, so you gotta figure out, whereas Airbnb people are always coming through. I say Airbnb, but I mean short-term rentals, booking.com, VRBO, Airbnb, they're all short-term rental stuff. Airbnb is like saying Kleenex to me, that's all. So, instead of saying tissue, we see Kleenex. Anyways, okay. Evelyn, do you have anything to add on that? You used to do property management, you used to do short-term rentals in a past life. Do you have anything you want to say on that?
Actually, I was answer one of the question, Angela. I say, do you think it would be wise to go with short-term rental instead of long-term? I think it's depend of the time the person has. I think short-term, you can earn more, but at the same time, then you have to flip and you need to clean and you need to put more time on it. Long-term, basically, the house is here, the client's gonna be there, and you don't have to be flipping and cleaning the house all the time. So it's depend of your time and how much you want to put in there.
Yeah, that's a valid point. I think it's important. Property management, depending where you are in Panama, is not always the easiest thing to obtain. Okay. People always ask me, do you got a good property manager that you can recommend? I said, I'm going to give you a list of people and you interview them, because I don't always want to be responsible for recommending somebody that doesn't want to work. So property management, it depends on how big of the market you're in, because sometimes the smaller niche markets are easier to make money on rental income properties, but then the hard part about it is the property management side. So it really depends on, are you going to be living here and running the houses yourself, or are you going to be back in your home country part of the year or all the time and expecting somebody else to run your rentals, and that really depends on short-term or long-term of what's going to work. So those are things very, very important to consider going into that. And we're happy to talk to you about based on the market you're going in. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, also, because it's short-term, need to be very organized, like give them instruction in the first day, because then they're gonna be calling you, where's the TV, where you can turn on the TV, for example. That happened to me. Or in the middle of the night, there's something happened, and then they're gonna call you. So short term, you need time to be there all the time. Long term, not too much.
I have a friend right now running a short term, and they're back in Canada, and it's a house that I sold to them a couple of years ago. And she just got a call the other day from the short-term renter that there was a lot of white spots all over the furniture outside. And she sent her a picture and a video, and she was, well, it's bird poop. What do you want me to do about it? Like, you know, the bird poop wasn't there the one day and there was bird poop there the next day. And the Airbnb renter was basically complaining because the bird pooped on a few chairs outside and they wanted the Airbnb host to deal with the bird poop on the chairs outside. Me personally, I can't deal with that type of stuff, but it's, you know, each person individual. Evelyn, she could deal with it, you know. I can't. I don't have the patience for that.
Yeah, there's no way. That's why I like looking at long-term rentals. I mean, 6 months would be the minimum, only because of crap like that. Like, just literally, no pun intended. Yeah.
All right. We got some questions. We're going to jump over to that now because I do want to keep this to around 45 minutes. We never do, but I'm going to aim for 45 minutes. So we had some questions. Evelyn has answered the majority of these questions. Some of them were, Maurice was not catching the audio, but I think Maurice exited the call. So I answered, who was this that asked this question? Michael, you answered it that the 10% deposit is used to pay the seller's outstanding taxes. Quite often, yeah. If sometimes there's like the previous year's property taxes for $1,000 or $500 or something like that's outstanding. So sometimes the 10% comes in, it gets released to the seller as a deposit. It locks the property in, so it's yours. But what the lawyers quite often are going to do with that money, instead of giving it all to the seller and then it doesn't get put towards stuff, the lawyers are going to say, listen, before we give you that money, we're going to zero sum out the properties. Okay. We're going to zero sum out the properties, then give the seller the remainder. So they're going to pay off the last electricity bill. They're going to pay off the last water bill. They're going to pay off any outstanding property taxes. If you're buying the corporation, sometimes they'll pay off the last year of the corporate. It's not a corporate tax, but it's like a corporate filing fee. It's $300. They'll do all that type of stuff, then give the seller the remaining money. That way, the seller doesn't get your 10% and then doesn't do all that stuff, and it holds up the transaction happening. So the lawyers quite often take that and make sure that all that stuff is paid off for the 10%. Sometimes I have buyers that are like, well, I shouldn't have to pay for that stuff. You're not paying for that stuff. You're putting a deposit down and the lawyer is using the deposit money to make sure that that stuff's done. That's more of how you have to view it, okay? Mark followed up about what Barry had said about his electricity costs. I want to just touch on that a little bit. So Barry's electricity costs are $300 to $374 a month. He has a casita, the pool, the other side of the duplex that he lives in, stuff like that. It really depends on the climate you're living in, and it really depends on how much do you use your air conditioners, okay? And I say this all the time. I have friends here, and they're paying $40 a month for electricity. I have other people here that are clients. They run their ACs 24/7, never open a window, never open a door, and they're $400, okay? Me personally, right now I'm in my home office. I'm running my AC here. If I go to my living, I'll turn this one off. If I go to my living room, I'll have my AC on there. At nighttime, quite often I sleep with my AC. So I'm using the ACs in the rooms that I'm in, and my electricity bill usually runs between $70 to $110. So it really, the biggest factor, Barry has a pool. Barry has a very, very big pool, and that costs some money to have that pool because those pumps running, and it's a bigger pool, so you probably have a bigger pump than a small pool. Those pumps are expensive every time they ramp up. There's a lot of amperage that gets used in that. So it makes that meter roll. He also has basically 2 homes and a casita. Okay. So yeah, his bills are a little bit more, but he's got the square footage, or here are the square meters, to justify sometimes of what that is. And I mean, when he has a big pool, I mean, he has a really big pool, and I like it a lot. So anyways, we answered the question there, Mark, about El Limon. It really depends, man. Like I said, there's variables on what your personal situation is, Mark, on whether or not short or long term works better for you, buddy. That's what it comes down to, really, in El Limon. What do you have? Is it a casita? Is it a smaller one? I tell people sometimes with casitas here, if it's a decent casita with a kitchen, sometimes you'll get somebody on Social Security pension that's maybe got between $1,600 and $2,000 a month. And you can long-term rent a casita to a single man or a single woman with a pension, charge them $500, $600, $700 a month, and then they have the rest of that $2,000 a month pension as disposable income, and they'll stay with you forever. And you get some single old dude in there in a pension, he's going to fart around and keep that place probably up in really good shape and be a really good person, that if you have a casita on your property and you want to go away for a few months on vacation, that guy's probably going to help look after your house too. So sometimes, in my opinion, if you have a casita and you have your house on the property, sometimes that is the idea, is to long-term rent. Yeah, you might get $3,000 a month on that casita on Airbnb, but sometimes charging the retired guy $600-$700 a month is like having somebody live on your property that can help you out too. So that's something there that's right there. Okay. What else do we got going on here? Sorry. We got to Michael and all that stuff. Mark, would you recommend renting a 6 month or a year before buying in Panama? Depends on you, man. It really depends on you. What I usually recommend, Mark, is that you go at least 2 weeks into an area and see if you like that area. Meet people, see is it a friendly community? Is it your type of community? I always say, people that like Coronado don't like Pedasí. People that like Pedasí typically don't like Coronado. So you need to go to both and see which one you like, as an example. Okay, that's important. Catherine, yeah, we do sell in Cañas. Yeah, and builders, we work with several different builders that do go to Cañas as well. The percentage of a down payment on a new build depends on what the builder wants, and it depends on the contract. Usually it's between 20 and 40%. I always say never give more than that, because the builder will go buy a new truck. So that's a really good question, but it's case by case on a new build, and I'm very happy to sit down with you, Catherine, and talk a little bit about more details. Okay. Barry, you answered the question there. Does Panama have HOAs? Oh, that's a big one. Yes, Panama does have HOAs. That's a good theme for next webinar, to get more into HOAs and the different structures of HOAs. Lots of times here, they're not actually HOAs, they're PHs, or Propiedad Horizontales, or community associations. So they don't have the power of an HOA in North America, but we're running short on time, and I don't want to get into the huge details of an HOA, but I'm happy to touch that. That's Evelyn. Can you write that down as a theme for the August or September webinar? That would be great.
Yes,
Mark, you're saying,
we're going to be sending at the end, or tomorrow, a follow-up of this webinar with some question. And one of the question is that what would you like to talk in the next, you guys would like us to talk in the next webinar.
Perfect. We got a question here. How much does purchasing a land work in Panama? Same as purchasing any other property. And we covered that at the beginning of this webinar. So if you weren't here, we will post the recording, and you can see how the purchasing process works. Okay, Angela, great. You're building a couple casitas. That's amazing. And then Barry answers stuff. Okay, guys, so we went about 5 minutes over. Does anybody have any other questions that we can touch on quickly before we end here? We're happy to write them down, and I'll handle one more question, and then we'll cut this off for this particular webinar. Going once, going twice.
Wait, I need to allow them to talk, so I'm gonna.
Sure. Where that control is.
Okay. Yeah.
Next time we'll have the cameras and stuff figured out to turn on for the Q&A period. Okay, buddy, don't worry. But the next one. So like I said, this is our first time, Mark, on this platform, and we just did a text questions because we figured we could control the flow of questions. Okay. So actually, Evelyn, we're going to cut that off now. Okay. It's 7:50. We're supposed to be done at 7:45. So we're going to cut it off now. Thank you, everybody, for attending. And we'll have another one of these in probably, I don't know if we'll get one in August, but we'll try for August. If not, then in September, we'll do another one of these on the same platform. Tomorrow, we'll send you all an email with a follow-up for feedback, and feel free to fill out the form that we put together for that. And if you have anything else, or you want to get together for a one-on-one with us to get into more specific questions, we're happy to do that. Reach out to us, and we'll send you a calendar link to book a meeting if you guys have questions. We're happy to educate and whatnot. Okay.
Anytime.
Anytime.
And
Yeah,
that is
we'll
also one of
figure it
the
out.
question of the follow-up, if you guys would like to talk to.
Absolutely. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.
Cheers.
Bye
Thank
now.
you. Bye-bye.
Bye.